So we are starting a new week, Likkutei Sichot, Volume 1, for Parshas Chayei Sarah. And this Sicha, we're only going to learn the first part together, so we'll try to finish it quickly. It's probably one of the most important Sichos the Rebbe ever gave. After he gave the Sicha in, when was it? Here I can't tell from here. It doesn't say, unfortunately. It does. In the first year of his being the Rebbe.
Yes.
Thank you. He expanded on it a lot more, and he mentioned many times that if you want to understand his frame of mind, you should learn the Rebbe Mo'arash. And I think that more than anything else, he meant this particular topic that we're going to discuss today. And let's get to it. So the beginning of this week's Parsha tells of Sarah's passing. The Pasuk says, and Sarah passed away in Kiryat Arba, which is Hebron, in Eretz Canaan. So she passed away. The Zohar, almost right away, mentions that there's something special about this. Why? The Zohar explains that Sarah represents the physical body, while Avram Avinu represents the soul. It's actually the first section in the Zohar. And the Rebbe talked about this many, many times, about this idea. Even from his father, Reb Levi Yitzchak, for Parshas Chayei Sarah, if you look at Likkutei Levi Yitzchak, where he expanded on the notes of his father on the Zohar, so he chose this particular section. That Sarah represents the physical body, and Avram represents the soul. So these two people, as much as they were two people, symbolically they're the body and the soul. According to this explanation in the Zohar, the Pasuk reads as follows: when Sarah, the body, died, b'Kiryat Arba. How do you understand Kiryat Arba? The heights of four, or something like that. The neighborhood of four. Who are these four? The body was once comprised of the four elements: fire, air, water, and earth. And this place, Kiryat Arba, the valley, or the city of the four, is where they came together. And that's alluded to in the word Hebron, that this place is also called Hebron. Hebron means to connect things together. So these four elements were connected together in the body. Then, after the person passes on, while he was living, all the elements were together in his body. And when he passed on, so after he came out, the soul comes to mourn for the body. The soul is still attached to the body at some level, and it comes to mourn for it. This means that the soul mourns the death of the body, because even after the separation of body and soul, they still remain connected on some level. So a lot in the Zohar this week is also about the kista de chayuta, the small amount of life force that is still hovering over the grave and connecting to the body, connecting the soul to the body. According to this interpretation of the Zohar, a very simple question arises. It is well known that Hashem commanded Avram to listen to everything that Sarah told him. Right? We just read that in this week's Parsha. She wanted him to send away Hagar and Ishmael, and he was very distressed by that. He was his son, he didn't want to send him away. But then God said to him, Kol asher tomar lecha Sarah, shma b'kola. Everything that Sarah says to you, you should listen to her voice. So, on a deeper level, this signifies that the soul must obey whatever the body demands of it. Poof. Talk about a bombshell. Huh? Well, isn't all of Yiddishkeit exactly the opposite? That the body is supposed to be a vessel for the soul, that the soul is supposed to run the body, it's supposed to lead it to do the right thing. However, it would seem the very opposite should be the case, that the body should follow the instructions of the soul. So it's a tremendous bombshell. So Rebbe knows he just said something very controversial, to say the least. There's a famous teaching of the Baal Shem Tov that will help us better understand why Avram was commanded to listen to Sarah, why the soul symbolically is commanded to listen to the body. There is a pasuk that states When you see the donkey of your enemy crouching under its burden, though you may want to refrain from helping him, you should surely help him. The Baal Shem Tov offers a unique explanation on this pasuk, Ki tireh chamo. When you see the donkey is chamo. When you will see your body, your physical coarseness, your chomer. Here they translated coarseness, but it's not coarseness. Chomer means material. When you see your physical material, you will realize that it is your enemy. At first you think it's your enemy. For at the start of one's avoda, when one is only beginning to serve God, the body and soul are enemies. Right? What did the Greeks say? That with the weakness of the body comes the strength of the soul. And it's not just Judaism. Everybody who's spiritual, even a little bit, favors the spiritual over the physical. In fact, we've talked about this many times. The word for body in Greek is soma. And soma means literally a prison for the soul. So the body is struggling under its burden. Initially, the body considers the yoke of Torah and mitzvos a burden with which it struggles. So that's how it starts out. That it's very difficult to perform mitzvot. It's very difficult to learn Torah. The body recognizes that mitzvot are not meant to remain spiritual concepts that must be physically fulfilled in order to refine the body. So although the body recognizes that the Torah is a load that the body must carry, it still considers the Torah a troublesome burden. So that's the beginning. So in the beginning, he's your enemy. So when you see your material falling down, the material of your enemy, it's falling under the burden. In addition to the fact that the mitzvos are intended to be fulfilled by people in this physical world, the actual performance of mitzvos themselves are physical actions carried out using physical objects. Now this is a thing we've stressed infinite number of times because the Rebbe stresses it an infinite number of times. The commandments are always, except for the commandments of the heart, but even the commandments of the heart, you would argue that they can't really be performed by someone who doesn't have a body. Because all the mitzvot are only commanded to a living person, someone who's alive. So they require physical actions carried out using physical objects. This applies even to the mitzvot that command us to have specific feelings, like he says. The emotions we feel toward Hashem, such as love and fear, as well as the mitzvah to know Hashem, are meant to have a physical effect. It is known that news that makes one happy can affect his physical body. So what does this mean? That if you love Hashem, but you don't feel anything in your heart, you don't love Hashem. You think you do, which is good, it's a start, but it has to come down. It has to affect your feelings. The Gemara tells the story of how when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai informed a certain general that he was now the new Caesar, at that moment the new Caesar was unable to fit his shoe on. Why? So the feelings of happiness that the news created had a physical effect on the body, causing his bones to grow, so the shoe couldn't fit. Likewise, the love and fear that a Jew feels for Hashem should create a palpable physical change in him. Right? Our Rebbeim taught us everything by example, including how our feelings towards Hashem should affect our physical body. There's a story of the Alter Rebbe that illustrates this idea. Once on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, when the Alter Rebbe came to the words of Chen ten pachdecha, and thus you shall place your fear on all the creatures of the world, he began to roll on the ground. He was so immersed in his davening, unable to complete the word you fear, your fear. He said, pach, pach, pach. He couldn't finish pachdecha. Because of the actual fear he was experiencing by just saying the words. There's many famous stories about the Baal Shem Tov. That once the Maggid on Oshana Rabbah, he had this incredible urge to touch the Baal Shem Tov. And he touched him. And he couldn't stop shaking. After he touched him, he couldn't stop shaking. The Baal Shem Tov left. He didn't know that he had touched him. When he came back, he saw that the Maggid was close to dying already. He couldn't stand, he couldn't tolerate the level of fear he received just by touching the Baal Shem Tov. The fear of God, of course. And so the Baal Shem Tov calmed him down and helped him and saved him. Only after a while was the Alter Rebbe actually able to complete the sentence. There is a story of the Tzemach Tzedek that also highlights this concept. During the early years of his leadership, As he was sitting with the Chassidim at a Farbrengen, a bottle of 90% alcohol was brought to the table. Spirit, right? The Tzemach Tzedek drained 2 entire cups and asked that a third cup be filled. Afterwards, he made a motion with his hand across his forehead, and the Tzemach Tzedek later explained, and the effect of the alcohol was no longer visible. It disappeared. It was like he had not drunk anything. The Tzemach Tzedek later explained that when he put his hand across his forehead, he was thinking about the greatness of Hashem, and that awareness brought about a fear that was so real that it completely counteracted the effect of the alcohol. Right? What's the reason that the Rebbe used to pull his hand across his forehead when he was saying the last Kaddish on a yard site? Same reason. Because when a person is now saying about his mother, about his father, Kaddish, he's very distraught, hopefully. And so the Rebbe needed to calm himself. So it's like moving away the effects of alcohol. So that the feelings do not get involved, because now I have to serve Hashem, now I have to say something. I can't break down in tears now. I have to say it. So he did that before he said, everybody does that now, like, I don't want to say like what, but kind of unseemly, because unfortunately most people don't feel after the first year that they're going to fall apart when they say the Kaddish. Right? Most people, we accept it. It's the way of the world. But for the Rebbe, it was very, very emotional. So he had to do this. We see from these stories that the fear that the Jew feels towards Hashem is not merely an abstract idea, but rather a physical reality. So again, to get to the point that even the duties of the heart, like loving God, fearing God, knowing God, all these things have to have a physical effect. You can't do them without having a body. The same applies to love one should feel towards Hashem. Reb Nachum of Chernobyl was known to become physically fat from the pleasure he would derive from answering Amen Yesh Merava. When saying these words, he would think about the greatness of Hashem and how Hashem is drawn down through all the worlds, including this physical world, and he would derive a sense of pleasure that caused a physical change. He became fat. He was a very fat guy. The pasuk quoted above with the explanation of the Baal Shem Tov continues, "V'chadalta me'azov." So the rest of the pasuk is, when you see the donkey of your enemy, you might think you may want to refrain from helping him. V'chadalta me'azov lo? It's like in a question. Are you free from helping him because he's the donkey of your enemy? The Baal Shem Tov explains that a person may think that it would be more conducive to his avodas Hashem, to his service of God, if he were to ignore these physical reactions and focus only on the spiritual components. He may think that the best way to deal with the body is to suppress it by fasting, causing it harm. But the pasuk then says, "Azov ta'azovimo," you shall surely help with him. The purpose of our avodah, the purpose of our serving God, is specifically to incorporate the physical body into our spiritual service of Hashem, thereby elevating physicality to great spiritual heights. Okay, so if a person had contemplated all the spiritual aspects of a mitzvah, but did not actually perform the mitzvah in a physical way, not only has he failed to do a mitzvah, but he has actually committed a sin.
Nothing happened.
No, not just nothing happened, but he's actually refrained from doing a mitzvah because of that, because he consciously neglected the mitzvah. If, on the other hand, he physically carried out the mitzvah with no deeper intentions at all, the mitzvah has still been fulfilled. That we've talked about a lot. The fact that I put on tefillin, and Moshe Rabbeinu puts on tefillin, it's the same thing. Right? Because it doesn't matter what kind of intentions we have. The fact is that we both perform the mitzvah. Obviously, one must strive to incorporate the spiritual intentions as well, but the achievement of a mitzvah is not dependent on it. We can see this clearly through the following story. Once when it came time for one of the Tzemach Tzedek's grandchildren to have a bris, a circumcision, there were two qualified candidates who were able to perform it. The first was an older man who was well versed in the spiritual significance surrounding the concept of a bris, whereas the second one was a younger man who was simple, but an expert in the physical performance of the actual circumcision. The Tzemach Tzedek instructed that the younger one be chosen and said, because one must actually physically cut. We can now understand why Hashem told Avram, who represents the soul, to listen to Sarah, who represents the body. The main aspect of our service of Hashem is to physically perform the mitzvot. The physical element of the world is the ultimate purpose of creation. All the spiritual worlds are looking here. They're all focused on this place here. The physical element of the world is the ultimate purpose of creation. Although this is not as evident in today's world, when Mashiach comes, we will see how the neshama, the soul, can be sustained by the high level of spirituality that exists within the body. The Avot, the patriarchs, were shown a glimpse of the world to come in their lifetime, And thereby Hashem showed Avram that ultimately it is the soul that must adhere to whatever the body commands. So, in this initial treatment of the subject, again, this is very early on. This is Chayei 57:11, meaning 1950. Chayei of 1950. So, it's a very initial treatment of the subject. Where does this subject come from? It comes from the Rebbe Maharash. And the Rebbe Maharash, in a Hemshech that has not been published, was published only in handwriting. Meaning they took the handwritten copy, and they photocopied it, and they made it into a book, which it is impossible to get. It's called Hemshech V'Kacha Tafreish Lamed Zayin. It's from 3637, which means that it's from 1877. So it's something that he talked about in 1877. And there he novelized this idea that the body is destined to give to the soul. That's what he calls it. That the body is destined to give spirituality to the soul. What does it mean? What is that like? If I would have to say this in scientific language, I need to give a parable from science. After that, I need to give a parable from psychology. That's the Rebbe Rashab's big principle. Anything in Torah that you want to explain, you need to give an example of it in the physical, natural world, and you need to give an example of it in the person's psychology. So the natural physical world is very easy, though I don't know what in the world the Rebbe Maharash could have given then, because no one knew about this. The physical example is very simple. That's E equals mc squared. The fact that there is more energy in physical matter than there is elsewhere. That there's more energy locked into every atom of matter than there is outside that atom. Because that's what it's saying. It's saying that the energy is equal to the mass times the speed of light squared. Which is a strange way to say it, but it comes out of the equations. So you will not get to hear the rest of this. I hope someone else does. So if someone comes tomorrow, then we'll be able to continue. That'll be a little different. You can go in.
Why? Sit in love with people.
Oh, so you can learn this with them. Okay.